Welcome everyone to our May 2022 live stream. I am here with Marianne McPherson, who is with us from the Neighborhood Birth Center, and she is a board member. And we're really excited to first start with our tremendous gratitude to you all at the Neighborhood Birth Center for these past couple of months. We've been able to share in your process. You've invited us into your process. And so just want to say thank you so much for that. We're going to be talking a lot today about a birth center for everyone and hearing about the Neighborhood Birth Center's work, and particularly the role that white women are playing in that work, and what we can take here at Becky's Anonymous as great lessons for ourselves about how we can step forward in the right way. One of the great things that we learned from you all, a common thread and theme, and particularly in that beautiful video that you shared with us, was the importance of story and storytelling. And so we'd love to first start, Marianne, with your story in connection with the Neighborhood Birth Center, just so our audience can get to know you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee. And I'm going to use the word privilege very consciously. It's a real privilege to be in conversation with you today, and thank you for the invitation and the time. I will not spend all of our time sharing my story, but I imagine each of us who's as a part of this conversation today could spend a long time talking about what it might mean to have connections to birth in some way. But you asked me about my connection to Neighborhood Birth Center. And there are a couple of different threads. And in fact, the way that I kind of very directly got connected with Neighborhood Birth Center was at one of the most difficult moments in my life. It was in the days after my beloved mother very suddenly died 4.5 years ago. And she was a clinical social worker for her whole professional life. She had been a support and counselor to many people who had experienced trauma in their lives, including reproductively and postpartum depression. And as she moved towards retirement, she worked at her local Planned Parenthood clinic, volunteering to do more counseling. So reproductive justice and support of birthing persons and their families and people at all key moments in their lives was something that she lived out, and she taught me and my sister, who is a nurse midwife, to care about. And in the days after she died, as my father and my sister and I were sitting around a table that we never wanted to be at, trying to figure out where we might invite memorial donations in her name. I don't know where this bubbled up from in me, but I remembered that I had learned that one of the ways in which racial wealth inequality continues to get magnified, there are so many, but one of them is that when white folks die, the memorial contributions that get honored in their names often are going to predominantly white-led organizations. So it's just another way intergenerationally to perpetuate wealth inequality. And I somehow remembered this and said, hey, I'm aware of, through a friend and colleague and in my professional life, an organization that's getting off the ground in Boston. My mom was born in Boston. I was born in Boston. That is working to build Boston's first freestanding birth center. And I, in those days, got connected to Nashira Burrell, who's our director. And that moment of trauma and pain and death has itself birthed this extraordinary connection to the women I'm in circle with and the men I'm in circle with through the birth center. So that's a piece of the story of how I got connected originally.
Thank you so much, Marianne, and especially with Mother's Day recently passing, just thank you for sharing that. And as a daughter of a social worker, as a social worker myself, appreciate, just all the layers to what you just shared of how we treat stories, and you know, as a social worker, we think a lot about that kind of the people whose stories we are privileged and honored to be a part of, particularly at some of their most troubling moments. And so just appreciate that, and the testament that you're giving also to the work that your mother did, and just how beautifully you're carrying that on, and really what that her spirit was, and what obviously she wanted to see in the world, and how you're carrying that on.
Thank you.
Would love to hear, you know, that's such a powerful moment you're talking about, you know, around the table. That's such a powerful image, and would love to hear, you know, how were you, before that moment, did you sort of think about the role of white women in all of this, and how now, after experiencing that moment, now kind of being with the neighborhood birth center after that moment, are you thinking about that differently or not? Just curious kind of how that's evolved for you in that story that you just described.
Yeah, about the role of white women in reproductive justice, in how I want to be sure that I'm going to
Yeah,
get to the
I think
question
in,
you're
you know,
asking.
in racial justice and you know, kind of just
Yeah.
in all of that, you know, yeah, in both.
Yeah. So I think to really answer that, I'd have to be like even more deeply reflective than I maybe am. Because I think it's such a really important and also really complex question. Um, and it's one that I have asked in different ways myself. So I feel like, and in fact, I think I would invite us as white folks to shift the question a bit, as we understand how much systems of injustice and racial oppression and white supremacy culture are making it so that nothing's working well really for anyone. So as before, and I don't mean before my mom died, I think before I was, well, and there is no before, because none of this is linear, right? I remain deeply on my own journey, and I keep learning and unlearning. I think there are some days and moments where the question I ask is, you know, why is it important for white women to show up in support of racial justice, or in terms of um, and I think the question that I want to be asking myself is, how might we all get free? Where are the ways in which systems are tricking us as white folks into thinking that the question is about how might we do for others in a way that draws on a whole lot of, I think, particularly like white woman conditioning, at least that I experienced, about, you know, what does it mean to be a good person and to be generous or charitable, or and shifting that conversation to turning the mirror back on myself, and first to understand how I show up as part of that system that isn't working for anyone and that is creating oppression, and also to realize how interconnected we are. And so asking, how might we all get free? What happens for all of us when we hold birth sacred, and when we do so by centering the experiences of those who are currently most marginalized by these really broken systems. So in the case of birth, um, the US does really, really poorly on a global scale in terms of our maternal mortality rates. And even if you consider the rate of mortality just for white birthing persons, we actually still don't do that great. And so being deeply and meaningfully engaged in this work invites us to ask, how is my liberation bound to your liberation? What is my very literal skin in the game in understanding how these systems are toxic to all of us. And I feel like having this conversation today in the political moment that we're in makes that even more clear. But I'll pause there because I realize I'm probably both being very general and also maybe not answering the question that you're asking. So Lee, let's keep going.
No, I have the great honor of getting to do these live streams, and I can't tell you how many aha moments, even as someone who's talked about these topics for a long time, and some of these topics not as much. But the aha moment and what you were, there were a couple of things, but I really appreciate that kind of reframing of the question is more, how could we not be a part of this? Look at kind of what we're sacrificing to be a part of, to get those, I think we're in Becky's Anonymous, we're getting at this conversation a little bit of, the privileges a lot of us are kind of have gone through that kind of understanding, and now understanding the price of those privileges, like what's the cost to our, exactly to what you said, to our health, to for those privileges. And when we kind of keep buying into those privileges and keep, supporting those systems, there's still a great cost to us. And so appreciate that kind of, and to your point about this moment, right? Like what we're losing right now, how could we not be a part of this, this attempt to save ourselves?
Yeah.
Thank you. Would love to, that connection, particularly between reproductive justice and freedom. And I think this has been an important moment for us as Becky's Anonymous, diving deep. We've kind of looked at, ending white supremacy and looking at racial justice through different kind of windows, let's say, kind of, the criminal justice system, food justice, education, things like that. But this, topic for a lot of people was kind of, again, not to kind of put it in terms of like the window or this is the point, but I think for a lot of people, it felt like this crux of kind of, this is really this important kind of intersection to look at, and is the most important that, one, I think, member was kind of, to your question of if we hold birth sacred, was kind of, if we can do this, imagine what we're capable of. So would love to kind of hear, when you think about that kind of connection between particularly reproductive justice and freedom, what that brings up for you.
Yeah, I got little tinglies on my arms, Lee, as you were even asking the question, because so first, I think everyone has some kind of connection to a birth story. I have a friend and colleague who brought to my work family, but we brought it to my family, a tradition from her family, which is on somebody's birthday, asking them a set of birthday questions for sort of reflection on the year. But the first birthday question is always, what's the story of your birth that you know? And so everyone has a connection to some kind of birth story, whether it is their own or their child, or nibbling their niece or nephew, or some special person in their world. It is deeply personal. Everyone is connected in birth. So there's something, as we think about storytelling and relationship, like those are features of birth always. And so, like, putting my public health and like social policy work hat on for a minute, life course is a sort of part of our scientific understanding that what happens in the early moments of our lives as little babies and young kids is super influential in our development later on. And so birth is kind of just this extraordinarily important moment for the person who is being born, for the persons who are in the room when that happens, for the person who is giving birth. And so there's something, I think, that kind of is also fundamental to our humanity if we can't figure this out, what does that say about us? And also, I feel that there's such deep possibility in what happens if we truly can honor and hold sacred birth in the way that I believe that it is as a fundamental human experience. I also believe that birth has become, in many ways, understanding the kind of the history and experience with birth and medicalization in the United States is its own lesson in white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism and things that have disconnected us from one another and from ourselves. There have also been some really extraordinarily helpful safety benefits that have come from medicine, and birth has become sort of deeply over medicalized. And so I think that the process of reconnecting us to what is truly possible, sacred, and just good public health related to birth, I think I both think if we can do it with this, if we can reconnect and get free related to birth, I think we can figure it out in a whole lot of other ways. And if we're not doing it related to birth, it doesn't matter what we're doing anywhere else. I mean, it matters, but I think things will still come back to how are we holding people in these first moments of their lives, and how are we holding one another as we give birth. It just there's so much in there.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on particularly in the video, because I've had this conversation a lot, especially in social work and things like that, about how important the early life is. And Oprah Winfrey just wrote a book of, so that there's kind of this mainstreaming of kind of that concept. But what's really interesting is, I think what's helpful about Neighborhood Birth Center is you all beautifully illustrate that moment is about also all these other people and relationships and connections. Yeah. And I think sometimes in public health, and people lose sight of that. They're like, okay, we got to figure out the baby, right? And you forget, no, that means why the person giving birth, their health is just as important, because that is such an important factor. And in the video talking, referencing the intergenerational relationships, and the other person who's involved in that child's creation, where they are and what their relationship is, and just how beautifully the kind of that balance of all those stories, and keeping kind of that focus on, we're trying to create this birth story, but it means that we have to invest in all the other people that are involved in it, and how inextricably linked we are always and forever. So appreciate that.
Yeah, and the ways that, if I could just add to that,
yeah,
real quick, like the ways that our communities can and should be connected. We've not only disconnected, I think, people from one another, we have disconnected the process of birth from the broader community. And so part of what Neighborhood Birth Center will be as a truly freestanding community birth center is we are going to be co-located in a space with other organizations, with other physical space, such that members of the community, laboring people will not be needing to walk through a community meeting in order to get to the birth suite. They'll have privacy to do that. But the idea of a birth center not being kind of just behind the hospital walls, but that as people are coming for their prenatal well checks, they're also able to access other community spaces, and other community spaces are able to be connected to what's happening at the birth center. That's another kind of fundamentally important goal of ours, and sort of belief in connection to the broader community that we have really kind of sanitized and separated, and that the birth center will be one, I hope, really important way for that reconnection with community and one another more broadly extending beyond the family who's giving birth, or the person who's giving birth.
Yep. No, great point. And I think particularly it makes me think of, the data in Boston, which, I know you all are much more familiar with than I am, but, when you look at some of the best hospitals, in the country and the neighborhoods right around them, not being able to benefit, from, of course we've seen improvements in kind of care and in the medical field in a lot of ways. But to your point, when there's not that community relationship, not everybody benefits from it. And there's that real kind of breakdown when you don't have that community relationship and integration. And I'm not saying it's just about kind of us being able to connect the medical piece, but it's just a good another evidence of kind of exactly what you're talking about of that community relationship. Without it, you really have nothing.
Yeah.
Would love to hear more about that vision, that visioning process. It seems like one of the things that's really inspired a lot of us at Becky's Honest is the visioning that you all have, just the kind of freedom and strength and clarity and beauty that you all have in your vision. So we'd just love to hear a little bit more, just kind of what your visioning process is like. Why do you think you all have that?
Oh gosh. I mean, this is where I just need to acknowledge that I am one voice as part of a much broader set of conversations that are that have been happening in the city of Boston for decades now. And in this moment, with the circle that's gathered here, which is connected to the leaders who have come before us, this is the moment where it's going to happen. And these conversations and this visioning has been happening in the city of Boston for a while now. And yes, I'm on the board, and I feel like I am. It's just my privilege to be in space with the leaders who have been doing the visioning work and the very kind of complicated nuts and bolts, figuring out legal requirements and all sorts of things that are part of the complexity of opening a birth center. So just kind of with those caveats, part of what our visioning process has been like, and I will say it's visioning coupled with very hard work and intentionality around now bringing that vision to reality so that we can open our doors a year from now. But it's a real commitment to acknowledging and understanding how we want to be in this work. So one of our first, as we were kind of formally joining as the board in this iteration of the board, we spent a lot of time saying, what are our commitments to each other, and how do we, so we were incorporating as an organization, what are our values and ways that we want to live and work and bring forward this birth center. So what is the experience that we hope that every family will have and birthing person who walks through our doors, and how do we make that experience our experience right now and in every moment? So there's been just a very intentional commitment of both sort of visioning and intentionality of how we want to be as a board, how we want to be as an organization. What does that look like when we are when we're hiring our staff? How do we be conscious, and where we can and need to disrupt patterns of white supremacy culture in how we are with one another, and what our systems, structures, and processes are? How can we be practicing liberation in the everyday ways that we're working together? And so that has included big visioning conversations and very concrete, tactical, practical conversations in everything from, questions of real estate to hiring to how we want to talk about fundraising and our capital campaign. but also it's in the context of, and my background here is a rendering of what a birth suite could look like, right? Like, I don't know, I'll move to the side. Like, to me, this looks like an amazing hotel room. This is a room. It's a rendering from our architects that could be what a birth suite looks like. And as we have had the privilege as board members to virtually tour some other community birth centers that are part of the Birth Center Equity Network, there are Zoom recordings of us, of our jaws just dropping to the floor, and several people being like, "I'm going to go back and have another kid because this is what I want." Like, there is an embodied sensation of wow. Like, I feel very, very lucky in the two birth experiences I had when I gave birth to my kids, and I was, it was a nice room. It was not a room like this. And so holding in front of us, beside us, behind us if we're on Zoom, like a true and tangible vision, and our values alongside that, and then together asking, so what does that mean in terms of how we're showing up today? What does that mean in terms of what our budget's looking like right now? What does that mean in terms of this conversation with a potential donor or a potential clinical partner or anything? We're trying to be really intentional about that, be serious about that, and also hold that tingly, amazing vision and joy alongside all of that, because that's also part of, I don't know, I can just speak for myself. To me, that's kind of what getting free starts to feel like.
Would love to hear when you think of, and I'm sure you all have had these conversations, when you think about Boston kind of 5, 10, 15, 50 years into this birth center existing,
Mm.
would love to hear kind of what comes up for you all.
Well, we just released this video that does some of that visioning, and so I'm really holding some of those images from Molly Crabapples, the artist, in my mind. But I really believe that just in the same way that I think about the possibility from a new child being born and the ripples that that person's life has the potential to create, I think about the same for what neighborhood birth center can be for the immediate community where it will be located, for the families who walk through the doors, and for the ripples that that creates in our city, for what that kind of sacred, free, joyful, safe birth, located in community, connected to other community organizations, and to so many people and families and networks in the community. Those are the images I have. I have images of not only a beautiful spring date like today, where everybody is out on the streets and people have kind of come out of whatever hobbit holes they've been in when it's been really cold, but I also see snowball fights outside the birth center for the youth who are hanging out around there, who maybe were born there themselves, however many years ago. Um, I see circles of elders who gave birth at the birth center and now are in the room gathered for their great grandchild's graduation or blessing way. Um, I also see policy and other concrete outcomes that the birth centers demonstrating what's possible has shaped in terms of what other community institutions look like, in terms of other policies and structures that can be designed around justice and freedom and abundance instead of around scarcity. Because I believe too that part of the way that we're operating from is from a mindset and a posture of abundance. And I see so much possibility in that. And part of why I'm stumbling over my words is that I'm just one person. I'm just one white girl dreaming here, and there are so many dreamers whose visions are in much more technicolor and have much more specificity than mine, and our visions can blossom together alongside one another. And so I look forward to chatting again in 25 more years and talking about what it looks like. And I see more birth centers popping up because I see the demand growing. We're going to be able to to support a limited number of births per year, and I believe that we'll be able to model what's possible, and that this will be an experience that more families demand to have, and we'll need to figure out how to shape things to have that be more sustainable, because right now the economic model of freestanding birth centers is completely not sustainable. So I believe there's both that tingly, beautiful, visiony stuff and some like roll up our sleeves, figure out how to untangle the knots that our racist, capitalist, patriarchal systems have created to put us in the bind that we're in. I believe that we're going to figure out how to untie those knots and create a third way.
So I think that, sorry, my muting, they're doing a yard work outside.
Cool.
But yeah, well, first of all, you got me all teary eyed. I was like, this is why we have to stop doing live streams, because it's so hard to, a lot of times, these moments when you're teary faced. But I think what you just said is just why we at Becky's Anonymous are so grateful for this opportunity that we've had with you all for the past couple of months, because the dream that you all have given us is just we are just truly grateful for it, and just the invitation to be a part of that dream, and taking, these cliche, but cliche for a reason, metaphors of just, the drop and the ripple effect, and the beautiful video that you referenced, kind of color, we are the watercolors, we can, color in this new future. And
Yeah.
how do we do that? We're just so grateful for organizations like you that are helping kind of illuminate that path, and just really helping us, as you said, you're one white girl, but here at Becky's Anonymous, we represent a lot of,
Yeah.
a whole group of white girls that are, really just hoping to be able to be a part of that path, and like you really emphasize, build on what's already been there, what's already been built, that's already there, that just needs to be strengthened. And so thank you all for that beautiful gift of vision, and dreaming, and that reminder, as you said, of kind of both the tingly, joyful stuff, but also the rolling up your sleeves, and getting in there, and again, that reframing of, what is at stake if we don't roll up our sleeves.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, if it's okay, just like two other things. One is we got to put our money where our mouth is, right? Part of my story was about a recognition of how white money keeps going to white causes and one of the hardest things for me, as someone who's been conditioned to just like not talk about money very much, and certainly don't be precise about it, to try to get in conversation with other folks, other white folks with whom I am in relationship, and start talking about money in a way that feels so hard to me. But that is part of the work that I believe that is required of us as white people if we're going to move to true justice and liberation. So that's one. And the other is, I mentioned like the system's not working for any of us. I believe, as a white person invested in racial justice, that I have a lot, that like the place where I can show up and need to show up is with other white people, to have the really hard conversations, to get concrete about, what does it mean when the systems aren't working for us, and how are we harming and hurting others. Um, and then to do like all the work that I need to do, when I have the incredible opportunity to be in community in the way that I am with my sisters of color and brothers of color in like the neighborhood birth center community and other spaces in my life, how do I know where my own work that is what I need to do needs to happen outside that space so that I can be in relationship in an authentic way, and know that part of that is also like part of rolling up my sleeves means sometimes getting out of the way, means acknowledging the harm I'm doing, means listening a whole lot more than I'm talking, means doing the work with my white siblings. So I realized too that sometimes I can make it the beautiful watercolor vision. I don't want that to wash over the really real work that I know that you and the others in this community are doing. And I felt like I would have been letting myself off the hook if I didn't name that. So thank you for letting me name the money and the work that we need to do as white people.
Great segue to our action items, which almost every month the top one is where to donate. So really appreciate that reminder. That a lot of times it's a lot of times we're like, what do we do? What do we do? And then when we hear like put your money where your mouth is, we're like, yeah, but we don't get cookies for that. We don't get our shine and over and over. It's like there's so many good things already happening. We don't need to be reinventing the wheel. A lot of times it's just people need more resources to have the impact that we are saying we want to have. So, so I'm going to just quickly go over some of our action items for our network. Would love to hear any last, if you have any to add or any last thoughts, and then we'll just close with our closing quote. You actually mentioned the Birth Center Equity Network. I think in your I think you were describing going somewhere. Yeah. So that's actually our top of our list for actions, is obviously donating to the Birth Center Equity Network. And we have information of how you can do that, as well as how to follow them on social media and be able to keep connected in what they're doing. Want to encourage everyone to contact their state reps to support the Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act of 2021. I'm sorry, Momnibus Act of 2021. Support birthing people and their families and access to safe out-of-hospital births for all birthing people, and get involved with the BIPOC-led birth center in your community. We're blessed to have people from all over the country, so really cool to get to hear on what's going on in their community. So just encourage everyone to check out where your local birth center may already exist. Want to invite everyone to Grow Circle this Wednesday to dive deeper into all the wonderful things you have shared with us. Marianne, definitely is so much more to dive into. So really looking forward to those Grow Circles this Wednesday. Just want to share with everyone, we're going to be going on summer vacation for the next 2 months, because we are transitioning to some new exciting stuff. So you'll get information about all of that and the new exciting stuff coming in August. So please put August on your map for big celebrations to celebrate our 2-year anniversary and to celebrate kind of some new things that we're going to be doing. So I'll pause there. Just want to, Marianne, anything else that you wanted to share, or any last words for our community?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all those resources, Lee. If anyone in this community is in or around Boston, Neighborhood Birth Center is trying to raise $1 million by the end of this month, and I'm happy to connect with anyone as you're considering what might that look like or mean. So I wanted to note that. I also, I believe that that birth and reproductive justice and freedom are really deeply connected. And so I invite folks to consider what that means in your lives, especially in this political moment. And I'm happy to share resources that matter to me related to that work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Great reminder. Yeah, we have all the information for donating and following your great social media as well on our resources. So great reminder to keep checking that out. So thank you so much. I'm just going to share our closing quote, and that will be our goodbye for today. So this is a quote from Alice Walker, who reminds us that how we come into this world, how we are ushered in, met, and hopefully embraced upon arrival impacts the whole of our time on earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you all out there on Wednesday.